Hi, I'm Patricia, owner and instructor of Oud Fashion Studio. This episode is all about scissors. If you've ever wondered what the differences were in scissors and fabric shears and all the different variety that you see on the market, I'm going to explain to you the different kinds and the different uses. So the first set that I'm going to go over is fabric shears. There's a difference between fabric shears. There's tailoring shears, which tend to be much longer, and then there's dressmaking shears, which you can find pretty much like at your local Joann's or craft store. So after a while, you're going to find the type that you like if you've been sewing for a while. And sometimes if you're a beginner, you have to try different ones until you find the kind that you like and the length that you like. I have a few different kind that I like to keep in my studio. I prefer the kind that has the plastic handle because they tend to be much lighter and easier on your hand, especially if you've been cutting for a while. Now, you may have a preference. The ones that are all metal are a little more heavy duty and they're smoother. So if you don't mind them, those are also a great option to have in your studio, but I tend to like them to be a little more lightweight. So I have a few different ones in my studio that I like to keep. These are just a few, and as you can see, they're different lengths. And they're great because if I've been cutting a while, I don't feel it as much in my hand. The second set I'm going to talk about is if you don't have these are great to have. They're called embroidery scissors, and they're great for snipping threads off your garment, or if you need to get into a little corner and snip it. These are great. I always keep a variety of these in my studio. These are my favorite ones, but you keep them handy. You can have them right next to your sewing machine. Sometimes they tend to be buried under all your stuff, so I like to keep them all around my studio, so I always have one right underneath where I need to be sewing. If they are too sharp, I suggest you always keep the sheath on, the little cover on, because you can actually cut yourself. And these are actually pretty sharp, so I always keep the cover on them. Another pair that's great to have, and if you've never used these, or you're new to sewing, or you know, you've seen them but you're not sure how to use them, are pinking shears. They have a jagged edge, and these are only used for finishing edges or hems, seams. If something has been unraveling, you can clean the seam off with a pinking shear, and it will keep it from further unraveling. So these are great. But a side note, you never want to cut out your pieces, your fabric with your patterns on with pinking shears. They're not meant for that. They're just meant for finishing, and they are also not crafting scissors. So if you are in a house where you have children, or you might have somebody in the house who tends to just grab scissors for multi-use, you might want to keep a lock on these, such as I have on my favorite pair of shears, so that somebody doesn't just accidentally grab them and use them for random things around the house. It's a good tip. The next set I have are rotary cutters. Rotary cutters are great if you are the type of person that struggles with cutting straight. They come in different styles. Now, this is my favorite one, but I have like 3 or 4 of them around my studio. This one has a little handle that you can actually grip, and it has a locking mechanism, so you can't accidentally cut yourself if you leave them laying around, but you have to have the locking mechanism on, otherwise it becomes useless. But the Ginger brand tends to be very sharp, so you always want to keep these locked. And these are great for example, if you're cutting silks or slippery fabrics that's hard to get that really clean line, rotary cutters are great. But make sure you have a rotary cutting mat, like a self-healing mat, so that you can cut smoother on it. And you also want to make sure you change out the blade often, because they get dull pretty quick. Another one of my favorite, you might have seen these in the stores. These are great to have. These are called appliqué scissors, but I use them quite a bit for cutting edges. Like if I'm doing a rolled hem on an evening gown, these are great so that I can actually cut away any excess and get close without actually getting too close and ruining the hem. So these are great to have in your studio, and people use them for different things, but that's what I personally use them for. And then paper shears, paper scissors. These are just your basic paper scissors that you can get anywhere. You want to keep these separate from your fabric shears. They are not interchangeable. Your fabric shears are for fabric, and your scissors are for just paper or other multi-use around the house, but you don't ever want to use these on fabric. Lastly, if you have a seam ripper and you need to take out quite a bit of seams out, this is a great tool to have. This is kind of like a hybrid between a seam ripper and a scissor, but it also looks a lot like an X-Acto knife. So you pull this up and it looks like an X-Acto knife. So it's very sharp, so you want to make sure you keep the little lever down at all times. And this actually comes in a case, so you want to keep it in the case so someone doesn't accidentally grab these and just leaves them around, because they are very sharp. I also want to go over shear sharpeners. I get asked quite a bit, what do I think about shear sharpeners, home ones? I'm not a big fan of shear sharpeners unless you don't have anywhere to take them. You live too far from a professional service that can do it for you. Then it's okay. You can have it at home and do it yourself. But I highly recommend that you take them in to get your scissors to get professionally sharpened. I know here locally, we have a service that goes to the local Joann's. You can drop off your shears. You could go in and shop, and by the time you're done, your shears are done too. So seek out a professional sharpening service, and they're going to know how to take care of your shears. They're going to know how to sharpen them, how to clean them. They have the right equipment to do it. And the home sharpening ones, it's not going to give you the same results. And really the goal is to keep your shears in good quality so that they last you a long time. If you have pinking shears and embroidery shears, you can take all of those into the professional sharpener and they'll take care of them for you. The only thing that's not really worth taking are the rotary cutter blades. Those you can toss. It's just better to buy brand new ones. Also, I get asked quite a bit about investing in industrial grade fabric shears and pattern making shears. Those are great if you are going to be the type of person that's going to create volume and you need the extra heavy duty type of quality so that you can create in your studio. But I don't really have those. I don't create volume, so they're not really necessary. But if you feel like you're going to need them, then of course it's worth the investment. It's all really on the use and your preference, and they really don't cost that much more than a regular pair of shears that you would buy at a craft store, like a Joann's or something. They cost about the same. They're just heavier and they're more heavy duty. So that's something to think about if that's really the path you want to take. As far as preferences go, shears can come with a bend, and there's also a lot of the tailoring ones are much straighter. So that's also something to think about. You might want to try different ones to see what feels good and what works for your hand and what feels more natural to you. There's no right or wrong. And I also wanted to talk about using fabric shears on paper. The reason that you don't want to use fabric shears on paper is because paper and a lot of the craft type papers that you see, novelty type papers that you see that have like glitter or they have some sort of mixture in the paper to make it crafty and like kind of like the book scrapping type papers, and there's so much more like real artsy type papers out there. You don't want to use your fabric shears because after time your blades will have abrasions on them and they'll become dull. So think about what's in paper. Paper has cellulose in it. It's going through a chemical process to make it into paper. So it's going to have paste and sulfate and chlorine and pieces of wood chips in there, microscopic ones. So if you look into microscope and you look at paper under it, you're going to see compressed fibers and a lot of threads kind of like cross hatching each other, crisscross, and a lot of particles in there. And if you keep looking deeper, you're going to see dirt and you're going to see little particles of wood chips in there. You can't see them with your naked eye, but when you're looking in the microscope, there's a lot of stuff that's in there that's over time going to ruin your scissors. They might not get ruined after the first or second time, but if you keep using them and you keep interchanging them, they're going to become dull and you're going to have them serviced more often, and they might not even be worth using anymore, especially if you're working with high-end fabrics like silks and chiffons. If this has ever happened to you, you start cutting into it and it jams in your fabric or it tugs, that's a good sign that you need to have your fabric shears sharpened or just get rid of them, because they're just going to ruin your good fabric. So here are some care and maintenance tips for you that you can take and maybe use at home that will keep your fabric shears maintained so that they last longer. If, like I mentioned before, you have somebody in your household that likes to use your shears, put a lock on them. That's my first tip. Keep your scissors put aside somewhere where it's only you unlocking this and then locking it back up and putting it away. Secondly, if you have a pair of shears that's really tough, really hard to open and close, you want to keep a pair of a flathead and a screwdriver handy. These are small ones that I keep in my studio. You can find these almost at any hardware store. You might even be able to find them like at a Walmart or even a dollar store. Sometimes I tend to carry tools like this. So if it's too hard to open, you want to loosen this up a little bit. You want to loosen this up a little bit, just enough so that they're easy to use, but not so loose that they fall apart on you. Another tip I have for you is oil. You put a little bit of oil. This is sewing machine oil. You want to put a little bit of oil in the moving parts right here, but not so much that it just drips everywhere. It's almost like WD-40, and you kind of want to get it in there so that it runs nice and smooth. But you always want to keep a lint-free cloth around so that you can clean off your shears and any extra oil that's in there. And that'll keep them nice and clean. Also, if you have a rotary cutter, and you know, if you've used these before, you'll know that you get lots and lots of lint right in here. You want to keep a can of air duster handy, and this air duster is going to clean out everything that's in here and keep it clean. You can actually take the rotary cutter out, pop the blade out, and then really get it clean in there, and then you can clean it out with a lint-free rag as well and really get it clean. And then just make sure that you put it back on and then you relock it. So that's another care and maintenance tip I have for you that you can use at home. And the other thing I had mentioned before is you always want to keep your leather case on, or you want to keep your scissors, if you have scissors that go in a case, you want to keep them inside your case. Another tip is if you are sewing and you have a lot of pins on your fabric, you want to make sure that you cut your fabric on the opposite side of your pin so that when you are cutting, you don't accidentally cut or hit one of the pins, because that will also create abrasions on your blades, and you don't want that. So make sure always to have your pins facing the other way so that you can easily cut where your seam allowance is or wherever you need to cut. And lastly, my last tip is if you're the type of person that cuts a lot and you're working with a lot of different materials, for example, I tend to work with a lot of really embellished fabrics like sequins and beads that have a lot of pieces on them. I always like to keep an extra bin of scissors around, and I never use my really good shears because I want to make sure that these last me a long time. So by having a box of extra shears, I can just pull another pair out, cut sequins or something that's super embroidered, and it's not going to ruin my shears. It's a choice if you want to continue having these sharpened, or you can just toss them. Lots of times I just collect them and then I just make one trip and then have them professionally sharpened. So that's something that you can keep in mind when you're cutting a lot, is to always have like another spare set of shears in your studio, because after a while they get dull. If you've been sewing, you know what I mean. Those are all the tips I have for you today. So make sure that you keep the right tools in your studio, you keep your scissors professionally sharpened, and the next time you go shopping, keep an eye out for all the different shears that are on the market. And then after a while, you're gonna have your favorite pair of shears and you'll know exactly what to look for. So if you like this video, make sure you comment or you like it, and make sure you follow this channel. And thanks for watching.